Go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy to get 20% off your first month of cognitive behavioural therapy, with weekly sessions online with a therapist, in addition to worksheets, a journal, meditation and yoga videos, and unlimited messaging. There's strong evidence that CBT can help people who hoard, and accessing therapy online can be affordable and accessible. Find out more and get your discount at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy.
Want flexibility? Take yoga. Want flexibility with your health insurance? Check out United Healthcare Insurance Plans. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they offer flexible, budget-friendly medical, dental, and vision coverage that may be right for you. More at uh1.com.
Say hello to a new era of mental health care. Cerebral is here to help you achieve your mental wellness goals with professional therapy and medication management support. 100% online. You'll experience the all-new Cerebral Way, an innovative approach to mental wellness designed around you. You'll get a personalized treatment plan from a therapist, prescriber, or both in a safe and judgment-free space. Your Cerebral therapist or prescriber will outline a customized plan with clear milestones along the way, so you can get to feeling your best. With Cerebral, you're not alone in your mental health journey. We're here to empower you to live a fulfilling life. So take that first step towards a brighter future and sign up today at Cerebral.com/podcast and use code ACAST to get 15% off your first month. Offer only valid on monthly plans. Other exclusions may apply. Offer ends July 31st, 2024. See site for details.
Every day is filled with opportunities to express yourself. And with an everyday piece from Blue Nile, you can do it without saying a word. Blue Nile's collection of diamond jewelry is the ultimate statement, with sparkle that elevates any outfit. Or switch things up with a sapphire piece sure to spark conversation. Either way, their diamond guarantee ensures you get the highest quality at the best price. Express yourself with Blue Nile, the original online jeweler, at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
Welcome to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. I am drowning in stuff and trying to find a way out. Listen as I explore the issues and delve deep as somebody profoundly affected by hoarding disorder. Find out more, including links to subscribe to the podcast and all my social media at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? I am okay, apart from the snow, which should be illegal. Today, I am going to talk about instant gratification versus delayed gratification or deferred gratification. And even if you don't know this terminology, you will be familiar with the ideas. We have in the modern world more access to ways to feed a desire for instant gratification than any time in history. If I fancy some nice Chinese food, I can have some brought to my door in half an hour. If I want to read a book, I can have it on my e-reader in seconds. If I want some new jeans, I can get some at shop in an hour or brought to my house tomorrow. It's ridiculous. Mind you, I say that as somebody living in a country where you currently can't buy a tomato for love nor money. So, it's hard to get a fully clear picture of exactly what's going on. But those are all ways that modern life feeds our kind of instinct for instant gratification, getting the thing we want now. Delayed gratification is when you don't get an immediate reward in order to get a later, bigger reward. So in instant gratification, which is also called delayed discounting, I will get onto that in a second, but instant gratification is when you seek out short-term pleasure without regard to what you want in the long term. Delayed gratification is when you forego short-term pleasure in order to get long-term gratification. I kept in my research for this coming across the phrase delay discounting. Now, the definition I have read 20 times and my brain cannot parse it. But delay discounting is the depreciation of the value of a reward related to the time that it takes to be released. And even though I am failing to fully follow that sentence, what I have read about delay discounting is that someone who has high rates of delay discounting essentially means somebody who seeks out instant gratification. So delay discounting, instant gratification, same thing. Now, this way that society is increasingly set up to give us instant gratification, I don't think is good for us. But I do think it's here to stay, and I think it's addictive, and we have to learn how to delay gratification even when we don't have to, because otherwise we get complacent. We assume there will be tomatoes in the supermarket, but the supermarket has no tomatoes, and we get lazy, and also we fail to reach our long-term goals because we sacrifice them in preference for short-term pleasure. I remember when I was a university student, banks used to really battle each other out to get us to sign up for their student bank account. I guess the thinking is that if they can get you as a student, they've probably got you as a customer for life. But they used to, every year, everybody would be following which student accounts offered the best deal. And often it would be like, we'll give you £100 if you choose our student account, or a different one would have a bigger overdraft facility. And the year I was opening a student account, there was one that you could choose between either, I think it was £100, or you could get a 3-year young person's rail card, which got you a third off every train journey for 3 years. And the 3-year young person's rail card was worth quite a lot more than the chunk of cash you would get. But most of us chose the cash because £100 now compared to a rail card that would be spread over 3 years and probably worth £150, we wanted the cash. There is this kind of ongoing battle in our minds. We want pleasure now. We want to avoid pain now. But we know that there's a long-term thing we need to look at. It's a conflict about often what we want to do versus what we feel we should do. It's ongoing. I mean, even the recording of this episode, I'm again recording on a Sunday, which again is unusually organized. And that is a form of delayed gratification because I'm thinking, I mean, it's not long term if we're looking at a week, but I know that for me, the end of this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are really, really busy. And so even though it's a Sunday afternoon and I could be chilling and that would be nice, I know that leaving recording till Thursday night would be absolutely nightmarish come Thursday night. So on the one hand, I'm delaying gratification and I feel quite gratified at that. But on the other, I was meant to start recording about an hour ago, but it felt more important to find an alternative version of a song that I really like by a singer who's really racist. And so the instant gratification of, oh, let me just listen to one more cover of this song also won over. So it's rarely a simple now versus the future. There are a lot of factors that come into it. But examples that most of us face in terms of delayed gratification might be saving money so that we can have a really nice holiday in the summer. It might be putting our phone down to get some work done. It might be going to bed on time even though you're reading a really good book so that you don't feel rotten when the alarm goes off tomorrow. It might be you're hungry and you could eat some biscuits, but instead you cook the meal that you really want rather than filling yourself up on something you don't really want. It might be turning the TV off and instead studying for the exam that you need to take to get the career you want. However interesting Breaking Bad is, that's a very dated reference, isn't it? And however much you want to see what happens next, you go, no, I really want this new career. And even though that will be in 3 years' time, I'm going to study for it now. And it's not just that delaying gratification can be a nice to have. A need for instant gratification can actively be bad for us. It can be really destructive. We might have unprotected sex rather than wait till, you've got protection available. You might drive too fast because you just couldn't get out of bed and you kept hitting the snooze button. I feel like the snooze button is such a symbol of instant gratification. It might be, getting into massive debt rather than delaying gratification and indulging so much in instant gratification that you just keep spending. And those are things that anybody can face. But I'm focused particularly on hoarding. So I've been looking at instant gratification and delayed gratification in the context of hoarding. So often the way that a need for instant gratification is particularly detrimental to hoarders is around acquiring. We want this tchotchke now more than we want the space it will take up in the long term. Or something I've spotted in myself. I want a thing and I want it in red and I see it in a shop, but it's in blue and my desire for the thing is so great that I buy it. And then I'm disappointed with it because it's blue and I re-buy it in red, which doubles the problem. But as well as to do with acquiring, instant gratification applies a lot in terms of not de-hoarding, which often wins out over the longer term reward of having a de-hoarded home. The instant gratification of putting something down regardless of where wins out over the delayed gratification of taking the time and effort to put it in the right place. So there's a lot to do with instant gratification that if we can address it as hoarders can improve our situation. And ultimately what it seems to be about, what this desire for instant pleasure seems to be about, is something that's called the pleasure principle, which is really simple. It's just that humans instinctively seek out pleasure and avoid pain. Now, that is obviously not the case in every single situation. So, if you run a marathon, you probably go through a lot of pain, but I know people who run marathons and they're completely hooked on it. It's nothing's as simple as we always seek out pleasure and we always avoid pain. But that seems to be generally accepted to be the mechanism behind instant gratification. But delaying gratification, the good news is that it is something that we can learn to do to some degree. If you have trouble prioritizing the long term because you are always focused on the short term gain, that is something you can address. You have to be more conscious, though, when delaying gratification. Often your instinct, like hitting the snooze button, like grabbing a bar of chocolate instead of eating a meal, your instinct says, yeah, this is great. Or even just, yeah, this is what I must do. Delaying gratification takes a bit of thought and a bit of deliberate action. And it does require you to stop avoiding pain to some extent. And that is, of course, what makes it difficult. But learning to delay gratification and succeeding at delaying at least some gratification can make you feel good, make you feel gratified, indeed. You can take pride in being the kind of person who doesn't spend the money when they want to spend the money. You can take pride in being the kind of person who does put things where they're meant to go straight away, rather than creating new piles of things to do. That sense of accomplishment shouldn't be underestimated. But of course, the other benefit of delaying gratification is that it allows you to achieve that kind of success in the longer term that is the real reward of delaying gratification. If your instinct says, I don't want to do any de-hoarding today, I want to stay under this cozy blanket and read Twitter all day, and you manage to override that and do some de-hoarding, you are working towards your longer term goal. You are taking the steps that you need to take in order to achieve what you really, really want to achieve. So it's a build-up. It's a build-up of things when you can say, okay, my immediate pleasure is less important than my long-term goals, so that the success of those long-term goals builds up over time. But none of this is simple. There was some famous research done that you might have heard of about marshmallows. I had heard of this, where a psychologist, Walter Mischel, got some 4 or 5-year-old children and gave them a marshmallow and said to them, you can eat this marshmallow now, but I'm going to go away and come back in 15 minutes. And if you haven't eaten the marshmallow, I will give you 2 marshmallows. So it seems like a really clear test of immediate gratification versus deferred gratification. Am I going to enjoy this marshmallow now, or am I going to wait in order to get 2 marshmallows? And what this research found was that the children who ate the marshmallow and didn't wait for 2 marshmallows struggled through their lives. They didn't do as well at school. They didn't do as well socially. They were more likely to have a problem with addiction, all this kind of stuff. And that was a study done decades ago and that people still quote today. However, it has now, to quite a significant degree, been debunked because for a couple of reasons, but mainly because the kids in the original study were not at all a wide variety of children. They were not from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different contexts. They were mainly the children of academics. And so the results of this study told us a bit about the children of academics and not about children as a whole. It reminds me of the Stanford prison experiment, very famous study, which is used as an example of how human beings can, how power goes to people's heads very quickly, and it can be quite dangerous and all of this stuff. Whereas in fact, it tells us mostly about men, and mostly about white men. And we can't generalize what some men did in one study to what all humans are like. And similarly, we can't look at 4 and 5-year-old children of academics and generalize that to all children. And so when this study's been repeated, what has been found is that middle class, upper class children can generally wait out temptation. They can generally defer gratification and wait for the second marshmallow. Children from poorer backgrounds, children from all more tricky circumstances, it's a very different matter. Because if you've turned up at that study really hungry and you're 4, you have a lot less chance of holding out for a second marshmallow when there's one right in front of you than a child who's come after a hearty meal. If you're a child for whom food is quite precarious in general, it's really hard to hold out when there is food right in front of you. And also how much you trust the person doing the study. The man says if you wait, you can have 2 marshmallows, but what if he's lying? So how much trust you put in adults will also affect how you behave in the study. And basically the results from the original study, interesting though they were, are not generalizable, and further follow-ups have shown that it's just not as simple as those who age 4 can wait for 2 marshmallows, age 30 or 40 will be in a much better position financially and socially and all of that. And there are also questions of scale, aren't there? Like, if somebody says you can have £1 or $1 now, or you can wait and in 12 months I'll give you £2 or $2, you'd probably take the pound now. It's not really worth waiting. But if they said you can have £1 now, or in 12 months I'll give you £10,000, you'd probably wait. And it depends on how much you need that pound now. If the test is around food, how hungry are you during the test? If you're being offered a winter coat and you're freezing cold, versus if you're being offered a winter coat and you're boiling hot, the results will vary. And then even further than that, another study, all the links to these things are going to be in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. But another study that was also questioning some earlier research that was looking at self-control found that the people who were the best at self-control were actually the people surrounded by fewer temptations. If they said they were good at self-control, what that actually meant was that they weren't using much self-control because they didn't need to. And then a further complication is that several studies, including one specifically on people with hoarding symptoms, have found that self-reported lack of impulse control, as in what you tell the researchers, and impulse control measured in tests don't match up at all. People who think they're great at it are not necessarily. People who think they're terrible at it are not necessarily. So what all of that says is that without looking at context, without looking at a person's ability to trust in long-term rewards, without looking at the scale of the reward versus the immediate denial of the reward, it's oversimplifying to say that X is bad and Y is good. And it's oversimplifying to say that one thing always leads to another thing. But there are truths in the idea that it is really important that we do our best to be able to resist short-term reward in order to achieve long-term reward. Regardless of studies, regardless of all of that, for the sake of our day-to-day lives and our long-term plans, we need to have some ability to have some self-control and to resist impulses and to resist that instinctual looking after yourself right now so that we can look in the longer term. Do you want to be a de-hoarding darling? You can be now at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. If you love the podcast and want a bit extra, you can finally sign up to be a de-hoarding darling. Members will get an exclusive monthly post with an additional top tip, some podcast and music recommendations, and a personal update from me about how things are going. Find out the full details at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So I'm going to go through some of the recommended ways to try and improve your ability to delay gratification. And the first one relates a bit to that one study that found that people who were good at resisting temptation actually just had less temptation around them. So the first tip, the first piece of advice is to remove or reduce temptations. So if there are fewer temptations around us, it's easier to resist them. It makes sense, doesn't it? So if you're lactose intolerant, it's a lot easier to not eat cheese if there is no cheese in the house compared to if there is. So limiting your access to whatever your temptation is can help a lot. Like, it makes me sad, but I virtually never go to charity shops these days because I know that for me, I'm incapable of making sensible decisions in them. So many of my, I guess, triggers come into play in a charity shop. First of all, it's full of bargains. Secondly, it's full of kind of one-offs. It's not something that I can go back and buy another time. Thirdly, it makes you feel like you're doing a good thing for society because you're donating to a charity, all of this stuff. I love charity shops, but I just know I can't safely spend time in them without acquiring things I do not need and that I definitely don't have space for. So I hardly ever go to them now. I'm removing that temptation from my life. If online shopping is a danger zone for you, keep your credit card or your bank card details in a different room from where you tend to be online. If you overspend, set up standing orders or whatever bank transfers are called in your country to have a second bank account. And when your wages are paid into your bank, transfer a chunk of it into that second account. Not so that you can't get to it, but just so that it's a bit harder to get to it. And if you need that money, you can transfer it back into your main bank account. But doing so is a bit of a pain. And so it just removes the temptation to immediately spend on something. Another thing, and this is really hard, but you need to be able to trust that the positive long-term outcome is possible. Because if you don't trust that, then of course it's hard to resist the immediate outcome that you can get right now. And so some of that is having faith in yourself if we're looking at de-hoarding. I've talked before about how I didn't make any effort on de-hoarding for quite some time, purely because I kept reading that hoarders never have long-term success. Even when a home is de-hoarded and fine, hoarders always go back to hoarding. I did an episode on, I kept reading this figure that hoarding has a 97% recidivism rate. And so I had no faith in the idea that I could successfully de-hoard. And so I had no motivation to delay gratification because I had no trust in the long term. And so why on earth would I deny myself now for something good in the long term when I had no faith and no belief that long-term improvement was at all possible? And what actually changed that? Well, one of the things that changed that was doing that episode on the 97% recidivism rate, because I really wanted to dig into it and find out what the deal was, because I kept seeing this number, but I didn't know where it came from. And what I discovered was that as far as I could tell, and I really, really looked hard, the 97% number was plucked out of nowhere. Somebody plucked it out of the air, perhaps said, in my experience, 97% of people don't even stick to having an improved home. And then somebody quoted them and somebody quoted them, and it became a figure that was meant to be meaningful. So that was the first thing I learned, was that I couldn't find a definitive study that found that 97% of people go back to their old ways after de-hoarding. And the other thing I found was that generally the examples used to highlight why the 97% thing was true were examples of people whose homes had been cleared out either against their will or in a way that didn't offer them long-term support, or that didn't help people to understand where the problem had come from in the first place. So what they were doing was looking at things like hoarding TV programs, where a whole house would be cleared out in often quite traumatic ways. And then they would go back 6 months later or 12 months later and find that the house was full again. And what it didn't represent was people doing the work of therapy, doing the work of understanding themselves, doing the work like I'm doing and you're doing just by listening, of trying to make incremental improvements in our behaviors and thoughts and daily lives. And once I started to have that understanding and have a bit of trust that long-term improvement was possible, then I was a lot more able to delay gratification, because I had some faith that the end of this process wasn't pointless. Another thing we can do that will help us to learn to delay gratification is to start small. It's really hard to persuade yourself to do a huge delaying of gratification if you're not at all used to doing it. But maybe if you are trying to delay gratification by 1% or 1 minute, seems a bit pointless maybe, but what it does is teaches you that you can do it. And then once you know you can do it, then maybe you can delay gratification by 5% or 5 minutes or 5 days. If you really want to have a glass of wine and you're trying to cut down on alcohol, if you say to yourself, you can never, ever, ever drink again, that's quite a big goal, however good your long-term gratification goals are. But if you say to yourself, I'm not going to drink today, or even I'm not going to drink till 7 o'clock, some people would look at that as a failure because you're still having a drink. I wouldn't, and I think a lot of people wouldn't, because the success in that is proving to yourself that you can delay. It's proving to yourself that nothing terrible happens if you don't have a glass of wine immediately. Baby steps. Instant gratification can be quite habitual, and it's proving to yourself that you can break that habit. There's no need to choose something to practice on that delays gratification for 5 years. That's a really hard way to start. Delay. Start by delaying, because that's what we're doing, but start by delaying incrementally. And if you try to delay gratification for a week and it doesn't work, that's okay. Delay for a day. Delay for 2 days. Delay for 3 days. And that will also help with the trust side of things, because if you delay for a day and then give yourself the thing you were delaying, then you start to have more faith that if you delay for 2 days, it will be okay. And if you delay for 3 days and then a week and then a month, whatever it is you're hoping for at the end will come. And it helps you to build your tolerance up gradually, build your tolerance over time. And some rules can be useful with delaying gratification. these have to be really, really personal. My rules won't necessarily apply to you, and vice versa. But if you have a real issue with acquiring and you're trying to get that under control because you want to save money and because you don't want to keep filling up your house on the one hand while de-hoarding on the other hand, make a rule that you can't shop on Sundays, or make a rule that you can only shop on Mondays, or make a rule like I did that you can't go in a charity shop, or you can't go into whichever area of acquiring is the most problematic for you. Make a rule about whether you can pick things up from the side of the road, and that will be different. Maybe it's you can under certain circumstances, or you can if you go back a day later and it's still there. Rules, we have to use them with care for sure, but I find that for me, a carefully thought out rule that is there for good reason, you have to know why. I have real trouble following rules if they seem arbitrary. In life, not just my own rules, any rules, if I don't really get it, I can't follow it. But if I know why I've set a rule, like in the episode with KC, episode 82, I talked about how I made a rule that if I was eating in anywhere other than my kitchen, I wasn't allowed to take cutlery there because I kept losing the cutlery. And because I knew that that was why, and because I knew that constantly losing cutlery was a source of massive annoyance to me, I was able to apply that rule because it made sense to me. I recently made a rule where if I've talked about this on the podcast before, I'm sure. I think it was an episode with Jan, Dr. Jan Eppingstall, psychotherapist extraordinaire. I was talking about getting really caught up in reading reviews for everything and comparing 80,000 versions of a thing to make sure I get the precise best one, and how that's fine if you're making a big purchase. It's wise if you're making a big purchase. But if you're making a tiny purchase, it becomes unwieldy and annoying and frustrating. And I got in a position where I was trying to buy some rubber gloves, and I thought I'll just check the reviews because I want to make sure I don't get any that split easily. And I ended up reading I don't know how many reviews of I don't know how many brands of rubber gloves for about an hour for something that was costing £2.50, and it was absolutely ridiculous. And I made a rule there and then that if something costs less than £10, I'm not allowed to look at the reviews. Because if I was buying the same thing in the supermarket, I wouldn't have reviews, and I would just buy whichever pair of rubber gloves was cheapest, and that would be fine. And if they did split, I would go, oh, that's annoying, and I would get some new ones. And so making a rule, if it costs less than £10, I don't look at reviews. I can stick to it because I know why I made that rule, and I know that it makes sense to me. So in areas where you find that you really struggle with instant gratification, look at whether there are rules that you can make that have good foundations, which will help you stick to the rules. And speaking of Jan, she would like this next piece of advice, and that is remind yourself of your values and your goals. Jan and the form of therapy she practices, acceptance and commitment therapy, has a big focus on values and how if the things you do are in alignment with your values, that helps a lot. Because if you don't know why you're doing something, and if you don't know what you're working towards, it's very hard to sacrifice immediate pleasure. The whole thing about delaying gratification is that it's working towards a larger goal, a loftier goal. If you, in the moment, lose sight of the fact that your goal is a de-hoarded home, then it's really hard to fight the instant gratification of dropping your rubbish on the floor beside your chair. But if you remind yourself that finding a rubbish bag or putting the thing in the right place is all serving the long-term purpose of ultimately having the home you want to have, it's easier to resist that instant gratification. If you want to buy a house, it's easier to resist spending a little bit of money on a small thing if you remind yourself that if you don't buy the small thing, that can go in the savings account for a deposit on a house or a car or a holiday. And so if you're not sure what your goals are, and if you're not sure what your values are, it's really worth spending some time giving that some proper thought, because it will help to back up every action you take from now on. It's just easier to deny yourself if you fully understand why you're denying yourself. If you are diabetic and you really want some ice cream, the instant gratification desire says eat the ice cream. But if you remind yourself, I'm diabetic, and if you remind yourself of the damage that a lot of sugar in one go can do to your body, I would imagine that helps a lot in either having a spoonful of ice cream and putting the rest away, or putting the whole thing away. And it's the same with hoarding and acquiring. If your values are that you want community and you want a home that friends and family can visit you in, and if your goal relates to that, reminding yourself of those things won't always override the desire to buy a new shelving unit, but sometimes it will.
This is Paige, the co-host of Giggly Squad, and I want to tell you about a company that I've been loving, Olive & June. Olive & June gives you everything that you need for a salon-quality manicure in one box. And if you break it down, it really comes out to $2 a manicure, which is absolutely insane. It's also so easy to get salon-worthy nails at home with Olive & June. The difference between how your nails used to look when you did them yourself and now with the Mani system is a complete game changer. The best thing about Olive & June, too, is it's a quick dry. Dries in about 1 minute, lasts for 5 days, and full coverage in up to 1 to 2 coats. Visit oliveandjune.com/perfectmani20 for 20% off your first system. That's oliveandjune.com/perfectmani20 for 20% off your first system.
Cool fact, a crocodile can't stick out its tongue. Also, you can get health insurance for a month or just under a year in some states. United Healthcare short-term insurance plans, underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage for you. Learn more at uh1.com.
And then I read a lot about something called commitment devices. And a commitment device is something we can do now that will help us to make better choices in the immediate or medium-term future. It's something we can put into place now that will help to control our future behavior by aligning things with our longer-term goals. So a commitment device might be a way to remove temptation, might be a prompt to remind us of what we're doing and why. And it does this by making it harder to give in to instant gratification, or it might cause us pain, not physical pain, but psychic pain if we do choose the instant gratification route. So the example I gave earlier about kind of hiding your bank card from yourself, that would be a commitment device. There's a website stickk.com. Again, I will link to it in the show notes, where you set a goal for yourself and you pledge some money. And if you don't achieve your goal, the website automatically pays that money to, it might be to a friend. Some people even pledge that if they don't achieve their goal, the money should go to a charity whose cause they hate. So that is quite extreme. You might prefer the money to go to a charity whose cause you like. Say you are very into animal rights, then you might say, I will have done this by the end of the month. If not, give this £20 to Friends of the Earth, or give this £20 to an animal rights charity. But equally, if you really want to make it painful to you to not achieve your goal, what you could do is say, if I haven't achieved this by the end of the month, give this £20 to a homophobic charity, or a charity that tests on animals, or I don't know what charity, I don't know what kind of testing on animal charity there is, but, a charity that goes against your core beliefs. Equally, you might say, give this £20 to my best friend. But it is a way to cause yourself pain by not achieving your goals. As well as hiding a credit card, some people cut up their credit card. That's another commitment device. There is also kind of accountability and co-working. There's something really effective about sitting alongside somebody or being on the phone to somebody while you work or while you de-hoard. There's something about that accountability. It was a long time ago, a novelist called Victor Hugo, and he was apparently a big partier. He loved going to parties, and it was stopping him from writing his novels. And so what he apparently did was lock up his party clothes, his formal dress, so that he couldn't go to whatever exciting society party was going on that night, because all he kept was a grey shawl, nothing else. And so until he completed his book, he wasn't allowed his smart clothes anymore. And it was through doing this that he wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is, obviously an epic masterpiece that has stood the test of time. And, even just putting your phone somewhere else, you can buy, I don't know what they're called, but it's like a plastic tub, and you can put your phone in it, or you can put snacks in it, or whatever you're trying to resist, and close it, and then and set a timer, I think, and then it's impossible to unlock and get at the thing. And then there's a writer called Johann Hari. He's talked about this. It was basically how he got his book written, was he would put his phone in this thing, set it for 2 hours, and then try as he might, there was no way of getting at his phone, and that's how he got his book written. So when you're trying to think of commitment devices, it is thought that there are 3 main ways that this thing can cost you if you don't stick to your plans. And these are social, friction, and financial. A commitment device that uses social cost is something like planning a workout with a friend and then not turning up for that has a social cost because it makes you look bad in the eyes of your friend and you don't get to spend time with your friend. So the pain caused by not sticking to your goal is social. A friction cost is one that just makes it a bit harder to do the thing that isn't in line with your overall goal. So that can be locking your phone away. That can be making your credit card hard to get to. And the financial cost is I think, quite self-explanatory. If the cost of not going for your long-term goal is financial, like donating money to charity if you don't achieve it, that kind of commitment device can be effective just because, we don't like to lose money. I love this. I love the internet for many reasons, and partly for exactly this kind of thing. Somebody has put together a commitment device database, which has ideas for different kinds of commitment devices divided up based on the kind of commitment you're trying to make. I will put a link to the commitment device database in the show notes. Another effective, and this is effective. I mean, when I do research for an episode like this, it's at least in part because it's something that is affecting me. And it is usually something that I've heard from listeners affects them. Or it's something that's come up in a study as showing that a lot of people who hoard are affected by it. And so when I do the research for the episodes, there is some self-interest. And so I want to improve my own actions and thoughts as much as I want to offer you advice. And so because of that, and because of the kind of person I am, I want that to be good advice. I don't want to waste my time and your time with things that are spurious or with things that don't really make sense. And that's why it was frustrating doing the research to see how many articles on instant gratification versus delayed gratification was still quoting the marshmallow study after it had been debunked. I would look at the date of the article versus the date of the debunking. And that made me a bit dismissive of all the rest of the advice in that article, because it would make me think, well, if they haven't checked up or if they haven't been aware that the marshmallow study has been debunked, then how can I trust the rest of what they're saying? And similarly, it's why I look up academic studies as well as more informal bits of advice, because I want to see not just what people think might help, but I want to see evidence where it exists of things that might help. And I also apply what I learn to my own experience. And so this is one of those things that I read and that made sense to me based on what I was reading, but also my own life. And that is, become aware and start to get in the way of your own autopilot. We do things without thinking. You know that thing where you are watching TV and you have a packet of biscuits and you reach down for a biscuit and they're all gone and you don't remember eating any of them. Or you get out of the supermarket and even immediately you think, did I really buy that? There's this autopilot that controls a lot of our lives, and partly it has to. We can't consciously think of every single action we take, but equally we have to be aware of the bits that are causing us problems. And mindfulness, while I'm skeptical of the idea that mindfulness is a fix for everything, in exactly the same way that I'm skeptical that CBT or what's the non-psychoactive version of cannabis, that anyway, is, people present certain things as a fix for CBD. There we are. Certain people present certain things as the answer to everything, and that is not accurate. And I don't believe that mindfulness can fix every problem in the world. However, mindfulness is ideal for becoming aware of your autopilot thoughts and activities and starting to take action, interrupt them a bit, because it gives you a bit of mental space. Instead of doing everything automatically, you start to think through what you're doing and when. And even if all you do mindfulness wise is pay attention to exactly what's happening when you go on eBay, you will learn a lot about your own thought processes and about how you end up with a basket full of pet rocks and retro jeans. Whereas previously you would suddenly, you would suddenly have an email inbox full of thank you for your purchase. Even if you still get an email inbox full of thank you for your purchase, but you're a bit more aware of the thought processes that went into that purchase, then that equips you in the longer term for starting to address some of those things. And so where you find that you kind of messed up in terms of instant gratification because you're on autopilot, those are the parts of your life it's worth trying to be more mindful, trying to pay more attention, and seeing if you can just address what's going on by understanding what's going on. And finally, give yourself a reward when you manage to delay gratification. Delaying gratification is sometimes fine and easy. You notice you're about to do it. You think that isn't really what I want and you stop. But other times it's really, really hard. And rewarding yourself can be a motivator that will help you. When I was quitting smoking, especially the first few weeks, was incredibly hard. And one of the things I was doing was I was using a couple of apps that told you throughout the day what was improving in your body. So after 20 minutes or something, it said, your heart rate is now back to normal. And then it would tell you when your blood pressure was back to normal. And obviously some of those things are quite quick. Some of those things are like in 20 years, your risk for this has gone down. But I found it really, really helpful. When I was losing willpower, when I was losing motivation, I would open these apps and remind myself of what was improving, and that helped. And that, I guess, was a reward in itself. But I remember one day it said, I looked ahead and I saw that tomorrow my taste buds would have improved. And I happened to be doing a food shop that day, and I treated myself to some camembert cheese, which is delicious already. But I thought how amazing to have the deliciousness of camembert cheese without taste buds damaged by smoking. And it really helped that I could spend a day looking forward to not just having some camembert, which is delicious anyway, but having like improved camembert because of the fact that I was not indulging in the instant gratification of sparking up a cigarette. So rewards can really help. And it's kind of swapping one gratification for another, but in a much less harmful way. If I delay this thing, can I give myself this other thing that will not compromise my long-term plans? So giving yourself a really nice reward that is not about acquiring something and that is not about making your hoarding situation worse can be really good, especially when you're getting started with learning to delay gratification, or especially if you're in a period where you're just finding it really difficult. So let me know, what are your favourite ways to delay gratification, and what have you learnt about yourself through delaying gratification? I'd be really interested to hear. Do you want to be a de-hoarding darling? You can be now at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. If you love the podcast and want a bit extra, you can finally sign up to be a Hoarding darling. Members will get an exclusive monthly post with an additional top tip, some podcast and music recommendations, and a personal update from me about how things are going. Find out the full details at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So my top tip this week comes from a voice that will be familiar to any fans of the Great British Bake Off, the ever adorable Nadia Hussain, who won the series a few years ago. And she's talking on a podcast called For the Love with Jen Hatmaker, and she's talking about parenting, but the message, more than being about parenting, is about making mistakes, and I love it. Have a listen.
As parents, we're constantly questioning what we're doing. And we have a firm rule in our house. We kind of say, we're getting it wrong together. They get it wrong. I get it wrong. And we this is the first time we're ever going to do this. First and last time I'm going to be a parent. And first and last time they're ever going to be children. And somewhere in between getting it wrong, we're going to get it right and meet in the middle together. And so I suppose just taking away that responsibility of trying to get everything right has really helped in my career with my children over the last 5 years. And somebody once said to me, as they get older, they need you less. And I'm finding that to be completely untrue. As they get older, they need you so much more. It's more than just feeding them and playing with them and getting them to bed on time. It's bigger than that.
I'm really trying to learn for myself that making mistakes is just part of the process. And I'm getting a bit better at it. And so I appreciated Nadia saying that because it helped. It's just part of it. It's just part of the whole package. The link to that podcast, as always, will be in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at @thathoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. And do subscribe to this podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes.
Now on Broadway, An Enemy of the People is a New York Times Critics' Pick. Jeremy Strong is one of the great actors of his generation, hails the Chicago Tribune. In a performance the Wall Street Journal praises as powerfully affecting and bitterly funny. Michael Imperioli sets off sparks, cheers the Hollywood Reporter. Victoria Pedretti is luminous, raves variety. From director Sam Gold and playwright Amy Herzog, An Enemy of the People is urgent, electrifying, and haunting, declares USA Today. An Enemy of the People on Broadway through June 16th only.